Hello, I'm Daniela. In today's video, I'll show the slow stitching technique of using the couching stitch. Now this is a fun technique that adds texture to your work, so it follows in my textured element series. And this is the textured element technique number 5. Now it's a fun technique with lots and lots of variations. Not only can you vary the fabrics used, the colors of thread, but you can vary the stitch length, the depth of stitch, and the closeness of the stitch to get a totally different effect. I like this stitch, it's actually one of my favorites, because it adds a lot of dimension to your piece, depending on the base fabric that you use. So this way you get a lot of depth and dimension, maybe even height to your pieces, depending on which fabric you use. Now I'm not going to show a completed project today. I'm just going to show steps that I take to make the couching stitch. I keep all these steps on tags, and I use those tags as references, as tools for future work. I will show you examples of how I use this stitch in my work, so stay tuned for that. Now here's my process for creating the couching stitch. So the couching technique is a very fun way to add texture and depth to your project, and it can really change your piece. Here's an example of couching that was done, and you can see it's really raised up here. If I turn it to the side, it adds a lot of dimension to this little panel here. Here, I did a couching stitch with a very textured thread, and I wasn't worried about going for perfection, and so I get a lot of interest here, a lot of very rich texture. Now here, I also did the couching stitch, but I left a lot of this yarn, this cording, exposed. So from here to here to here, I have so many different looks, and that's why I just love this very versatile stitch. So now in class, I'm going to show 2 ways to do this stitch. So now, once again, I'm just completing this stitch on my tags, which I keep as a reference tool so I can go back and look at different ways of adding texture to my fabric, and I'll link all these videos down below in case you're interested in learning some of these other techniques. Perhaps you can use them in your work. To do the couching stitch, you just need some thread, and it can be something as thick as yarn or something as thin as just embroidery floss or even sewing thread. And so whatever size thread you have, that will be the depth of your stitches, and essentially that'll affect your finish dimension. If you don't have thread, or you're looking for a super thick piece to do your couching stitch with, just get some fabric, some scrap fabric, and you can roll this to whatever shape you want, and that's what I'm going to show in class today. So I'm going to take this little fabric scrap, and I'm just going to kind of roll it just till I get the shape that I want, and if there's too much fabric here, I can just trim it down. So I'll just take my scissor, kind of cut this fabric in half so it's not quite as thick. It'll give me a little less bulk. If I wanted more bulk, I would just continue to roll more fabric together. So I'm even just going to kind of fold it in half, just the length of it. And this will be the piece that I want to couch to my tag here, just to show the dimension and the technique so I can refer back to it. Now the beauty of this, and you can use this with yarn or thread, is you can turn it into a shape and it curves nicely. If I take my Frixian pen here, I can show how I can curve that fabric to make whatever shape I want. So here's kind of a question mark shape. I like to start with a little extra fabric that I'll cut off, and if I'm using yarn or thread, I'll do the same technique. And I just put down my shape really where I want it in the beginning. And I take a pin just to hold it in place, and I go for the first major curve, and then again I'll play around with it with the remaining curves and placement. Sometimes it takes a lot of pins to get the exact shape you want, and sometimes if you want just a straight edge, it doesn't take very many at all. So I'll play around with that until I get the exact shape that I want for this question mark. Because it's fabric, it's very forgiving, and it's easy to bend and place and shape. And then I know up here I'm going to trim the end off, so I just want to kind of play with that fabric so I get that right arc, that correct arc in the beginning. right to the end here. I'm going to have to take that pin out, move it just a little bit, and play around with it. So this is the most time-consuming part of this project. So once I have the shape down where I want, I can decide if I want to cover it completely like here in this example, or just tack it down in spots like in this example. Since this is for reference, I'm going to do both. I'm going to start by going around this part, the curve, with a good space in between my stitches. I'm going to start over here. I want to come up from beneath my fabric, and I don't want to go through this panel that we added to do the couching to. I want to actually just wrap it around, envelop it with my thread. So I'll make my first stitch, and it kind of holds it together. I'm going to put 2 stitches very close together, side by side, just around this fabric. And again, I don't want to go through the folded fabric. And then I'm going to skip a little bit of a space, maybe 4 stitches worth, and I'll come down and I'll make 2 more stitches side by side. Once I'm fairly confident that these stitches will hold the fabric, I'll remove that pin. So I can pull that pin out. I'm going to again skip just a little bit, about 4 stitches in length, come up beside that fabric and stitch 2 more stitches in place. Now I'm starting to really hold this piece down. I can play around folding the fabric as I go to make it nice and smooth. And I'll come up over here, again continuing with these stitches. Yarn will sit a little bit flatter than this fabric, so keep that in mind. If you want a very flat piece, a little yarn or thread is great, but if you want more bulk, using fabric is the way to go. And again, I'll do my 2 stitches spaced apart fairly evenly. By varying the color of the embroidery thread for each of these stitches, you get a completely different look as well. Now I think I'm going to just do 2 more sections here with these 2 threads to hold my fabric in place. And I can remove this pin. So I want to skip a little area, and then I want to create stitches side by side to totally envelop and cover this fabric. So I don't want the fabric to show, I just want the stitches to show, hiding that fabric. So I keep my stitches close together, and if I have to go back and do another stitch because I left too much space, then I will. But if not, I can just continue right down the length of this piece. And I can do this on a curve just as well. Same procedure, not going through the top fabric, just the backing fabric, and enveloping that yarn or fabric that you're using. I think this is a beautiful color of embroidery floss, and so that adds interest to that piece. And you can continue this as much as you want. I'm going to just trim off the edge here and show you how I'll finish that edge if I want to complete it. So I'll make as many stitches as necessary to cover the remaining piece after I trimmed the edge of that fabric. And then when I get to the end, I just want to go over it so that the fabric isn't exposed. You just see that stitch. And it might, just to play it safe, I'll add one more stitch right at the end. Flip my piece over. You can see it looks just like it does on the front, on the back, because of the stitches that I used, where I always went to the same side of my piece. And so there I have the couching stitch. For up here, the beginning, just to finish it off, I just want to trim it fairly close to that edge so it's a little bit neater. And there I have my couching stitch just as a guide where I can make it spaced apart or really tight close together, and you don't see the fabric anymore. You just get that dimension and that texture. So I hope you found this video useful. As I said, it's one of my favorite stitches because it lends itself to so many different techniques, looks, and feels. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe. Thanks for joining me today.